So now we're going to have more fun with astrology here. And so what I want to talk about this time are the astrological charts of three different mystics, Rudolf Steiner, Sri Aurobindo, and Edgar Cayce, all of whom believed in reincarnation. And so first this is Rudolf Steiner. So let's look at Steiner's chart here. The first thing that strikes you is that he's got this peacock's fantail going down in the realm of the personal. Anything below the ascendant-descendant axis is all in the personal realm. Anything above it is in the public. Normally this kind of peacock's fantail you would see up here if it was a famous actor, like Harrison Ford has it, let's say, or Liam Neeson or Sean Penn. They have all their energies out in the public. And Steiner was definitely a public figure, there's no question about that. But lots of personal planetary energies going on here, and lots of interest in, lots of energy that's going through the occult. The first thing to notice here is Mercury conjunct Neptune. That codes for spiritual intelligence, and it is in Pisces, a sign that is associated with the occult, just as is the 12th house. And over here, his 12th house is in another occult sign. Scorpio is also associated with the occult, and his ascendant is right in the middle of the 12th house. And the ascendant is, of course, one's personal sense of self and what one wants to show to the outer world, to others. So that sense, his personal sense of self, is going through the transpersonal as he presents himself to the public. And then, of course, the midheaven is the public, and he's got Saturn exactly conjunct his midheaven. So this is an individual with a very strong sense of self-identity, who wants to be perceived as an authority in his respective sphere, namely spiritual studies, and also a tendency toward isolation and loneliness, even though this is the self that it's his highest planet, and the planet that he's striving for. And note that it's in the 10th house. I also have Saturn in the 10th house. The 10th house is career, and Saturn slows down everything it touches. It has slowed down my career quite a bit, and Steiner was a late bloomer as well. It wasn't until he was well into his 40s that his career really started to take off. And then so let's take a look at what else we have here. We have this archetype here of Uranus. Uranus is associated with rebellion, individuality. Rick Tarnas has called it Prometheus, stealing the fire from the gods. And notice that the red line there indicates that it's a 90-degree square with the sun. That is often associated with geniuses, rebels, people who bring the fire down to humanity. So he has that aspect. And then it's also at a 90-degree angle with Saturn. So the rebellious temperament has to be done through the structured aspect of Saturn. Structure is key with Steiner, and spiritual discipline is one of his main approaches. High conceptual German intellectual thinking. And then so Neptune down here, the sun over here. His sun is opposite Saturn as well too. So there's a lot of Saturnian energies in this guy's chart. The sun is the personality. It's in Pisces, so it's in the occult. Once again, all these emphases on occult signs. Pisces, Scorpio, the 12th house, all these energies going through the occult. Then he also has here Venus directly opposing Jupiter. That's his interest in art. Steiner loved art. He wrote books about art. He developed a type of artistic style. The guy just loved art, and that's Jupiter opposing Venus, which gives it a little bit of attention, something he has to work on. It doesn't come naturally to him, but he did work on it. This was a very disciplined, hard-working individual. Then we have this interesting thing over here with Mars conjunct Pluto. Mars has to do, of course, with the negative side is aggression, the positive side is courage, and it has to do with the body, also with war. And Pluto has been described as the energy of Mars stepped up an octave. So here we have the two of them in very strong, lots of Plutonian power energy here in Taurus, an earth sign. So there's a very concrete understanding of the motivations that drive people. Taurus is an earth sign, and Pluto is like the id. It's the deep lying power motivations, and you couldn't put one past Steiner. He was just too smart about people's motivations for that. Also, it's hard work too. Pluto is the drive, and Mars is work. This is an archetype for very hard work. This is a hard-working individual. And notice that the blue line there, that it is trine with Saturn. So he has a trine with Saturn, Pluto, and Mars. Those are kind of heavy planets to have aspected with each other, but then it's a 3 series, a trine, so it's a soft angle. And just as he has also Mars in a soft angle down there with his Sun at a 60-degree angle there. And again, that's hard work. And then notice, so his Chiron now, and pay attention to the Chiron, the healer, in all of these. It's in Aries, or Aquarius, which is an air sign, and it's in between Venus and the Sun. So this is the healing archetype, the healing aspect, and it's in between 2 very beneficent planets. So a lot of good energy there for healing and so forth. And then his south node is in Capricorn, which would mean his north node would be in Cancer at 21 degrees. I'm only aware of a few of Steiner's past lives, and it's too bad that we don't have birth charts for them, because I would love to see what the deal is with his nodes. He was Aristotle, apparently, in a past life, but there's no way to get Aristotle's chart, because when you look it up, you only get the year that he was born in. You don't get the month, because the calendars are different. You don't get the day, you don't get the time of day. So apparently he was Aristotle, and he was also St. Thomas Aquinas. And there again, back, the records, there's just no records to pull those charts up. And then a few other individuals, a priest at the temple of Ephesus, the goddess of Ephesus. And then so, all right, so that's Rudolf Steiner, and all of that very much befits a mystic. The occult transpersonal energies are very definite there. So let's take a look at Sri Aurobindo. So this is, let's see, Sri Aurobindo here. And now, so he also has the peacock's tail here, mostly in the personal domain. But in some regards, in some senses, Aurobindo was a more popular public figure. He initiated India's independence movement and became a kind of hero, a national hero for India. And that's right here, that's Uranus conjunct Mars. This is the political revolutionary figure. Mars as the aggressive energy, and then the rebellious energy, the standing up to authority is Uranus. So this is his political revolutionary tendency. And then he, unlike Steiner, who had Saturn at the midheaven, Aurobindo has Pluto at the midheaven, and Pluto is the drive and the desire to succeed. It's a very strong-willed, independent personality that he is showing to the outer world. This guy is not somebody that you're going to trifle with. This is a guy who also, like Steiner, understands power and how to use it. And power is a big thing in Aurobindo's whole philosophy. And of course, Neptune is in the neighborhood. It's the second highest of his planets. And then look what we have here. Chiron, the healer, is close enough for it to form a conjunction with a wide orb, 14 degrees versus 26, but close enough for a spiritual healer archetype, which is exactly what he is. And then we notice that Neptune then is at 120 degrees to the moon. The moon has to do with emotions, and Neptune has to do, once again, with the spiritual. So he's channeling spiritual energies in through the emotions. And then he's got Saturn trine Pluto. Again, that's the hard work aspect of his yoga. Fathoming deep down, bringing the supramental down into the physical body. And then over here notice that he has Mars in a quincunx down there with the moon. That codes for an angry temperament. So I don't know much about how he was personally, but I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't subject to angry outbursts. And the fact that he was a political revolutionary lends itself to that. Mars and the moon, that's angry outbursts. And then, okay, let's see. He's a Leo. His sun is in Leo. Likes to be the center of attention. This is a man who wanted fame very definitely and got it. He's got Jupiter right on his ascendant. Jupiter is the kingly archetype. It expands anything that it touches. And notice that it is in a 90-degree angle with Neptune. Jupiter expands the spiritual impulse there. Or I'm sorry, not Neptune, Pluto. So Jupiter has expanded Pluto there, the interest in power. And then over here we have the Sun conjunct Venus. And like Rudolf Steiner, this was also a man who loved art. But his Venus is also 120 degrees from Neptune. So Neptune and Venus is a kind of romantic archetype that couples often have when they're dreamy about each other, and they have these idealistic expectations about each other. And I know that he was married for 5 years to a woman. He had no children, and it didn't work out. I think probably after she found out that he wanted to be a yogi, she probably left him. Steiner had the same problem with his first wife. The moment he became interested in theosophy, she's like, I'm out of here. See ya. So Aurobindo never married. I don't know if he ever had any other girlfriends, but this does indicate this Neptune trine Venus, dreamy ideas about the opposite sex. And then here's Mercury too in the neighborhood, in an Earth sign in Virgo. Notice all the Earth signs that he has: Virgo, and Capricorn, and Taurus. And he is famous for bringing his yoga down to the earth. His whole yogic system was not about the traditional yoga of saying the world's an illusion, I'm out of here, I'm going to go off into the woods, meditate, attain moksha, and leave the rest of you poor souls behind. For him, it was the total exact opposite. Yoga was worthless as far as he was concerned unless you could bring those energies from the higher dimensions down to the physical world, down to the earthly world, for the betterment of humanity. And let's see, so that looks like the major aspects which perfectly suit him as a mystic and a political revolutionary. You don't find Uranus conjunct Mars in Rudolf Steiner. Politics did not interest him that much, hardly at all. So let's look at Edgar Cayce now, who's an American mystic that I've been researching. He also believed in reincarnation, and Edgar Cayce was a healer. He was famous for healing people. What he would do is go into a kind of trance, and then he could heal people without even having to touch them. And so here, of course, then, once again, we have Chiron conjunct Neptune, just as we saw it earlier. What was that in Chiron conjunct Neptune? That was in Aurobindo as well. Spiritual healing, right there. It's a much closer orb, too. And at the top, he too also has Pluto. That's also the power drive at the top, ambition, the desire to be known as a public figure. That's definite with him. With the moon nearby in the neighborhood, the emotions. And then so he has Uranus in Leo on his ascendant. Uranus is the rebellion thing, and it's the urge to rebel. So his personality... he thought of himself as a rebel, clearly, with Uranus right on his ascendant. Thought of himself as a rebel, and he has got Uranus at a 90-degree square to the moon, which is helping people be liberated from difficult emotions. Sometimes you find this in the charts of feminists, where it has been interpreted sometimes in New Age circles as the liberation of the feminine, because if you look up feminists like Betty Friedan and Andrea Dworkin and people like that, they do always seem to have Uranus aspected with the moon. And I know I've said that the moon, you can't just simply code the moon for the female, but there is that going for it. But here in Edgar Cayce's case, I would say that he helped people liberate themselves from very difficult emotions. What else does Uranus do over here? He's got it in aspect with the sun. Once again, that genius archetype that's stealing the fire from the gods. The sun is the fire, and Uranus is the Promethean theft of it and bringing it down to the rest of us poor unfortunates. And then he's got this interesting stellium in an occult sign, Pisces, where he has Mercury conjunct Saturn conjunct Venus with the sun nearby. So this is an interesting stellium that he has. Mercury conjunct Saturn is intellectual rigor, and then but He has two rather unfortunate connections with Saturn because Saturn conjunct Venus. I don't know what he was like personally. I haven't read a biography about him yet. But that makes the personality very cold and emotionally distant and unreachable. Hitler had this as well. And the other problem with Saturn is that you'll notice that it is forming a sextile with the moon. The moon and Saturn and Venus and Saturn are, and Pluto and Saturn are like the three worst planets that you can couple with Saturn. The moon with Saturn tends to produce lonely, isolated individuals who feel unloved. They have trouble with their emotions, or the emotions are inhibited or blocked by Saturn. So it's ironic in his case. He's got all this stuff to help other people with Uranus in the moon, and Uranus in the sun, and then, but then he's got these personal emotional blockages in his life as well. So then let's see, down here we have Mars, and it is sextiling that whole stellium there. So there's a lot of power there. There's a lot of personal willpower and assertion and courage regarding these energies going through the occult dimension. And then he's got trining both Mars trining Pluto. Again, that's very hard work. And then Mars trining the moon, which maybe he had a temper with Mars and the moon. I don't know. And then finally, what do we have here? Jupiter. Jupiter then is trining the moon, which is very good for expanding the emotions and knowledge of the emotions. It's very good. And then Jupiter also is going through the sun. That's the desire to learn and grow. He's got Jupiter, looks like a sextile, I think, with the sun, which is the desire to learn and grow. And this was a man who spent his life learning. Now I want to finish by discussing one of the past life cases that Edgar Cayce revealed to an individual. A woman came to him named Alice Greenwood, and she had a 14-year-old brother named David Greenwood, and she brought him to Cayce for a reading. Not for any particular reason. There wasn't anything wrong with him. He wasn't a troubled child or anything. This is his birth chart. Alas, we don't have his time of day, so we don't have the houses or the angles. But I think this is interesting because what Cayce did, and reincarnation took Cayce by surprise, actually. He was a firm believer in the Bible, read the Bible every day, was raised Protestant, came out of the Bible Belt, Kentucky. But when he finally learned about reincarnation, it took him totally by surprise. And he realized that it was true, so it upended his beliefs a bit. So I think he gave like 2,500 past life readings. So this individual, David, 14 years old, and this took place, I think, in the 1920s at some point. This individual was born in 1913, August 26th, 1913. And so the first thing, so Cayce goes into his trance state. He would normally lie on a couch. This is why he was called the sleeping prophet. So he would lie on a couch, sort of close his eyes, and he said, well, you got to be, so he's talking to, I don't think, David wasn't even present, actually. The stenographer is present and recording all of this. And he says, well, he has to be careful. He would refer to individuals as the entity. Steiner, when he's talking about people going through past lives, calls them individualities. I prefer that term than the entity. The entity makes it sound spooky. So he said, you got to be careful with the food that you eat, the indulgences that you eat, because you're going to have digestive trouble. Whereas at this point, the kid had no digestive trouble at all. And he also says you have to learn to curb your temper. And notice right down here we have that Mars conjunct Moon. There's the kid's angry temper. So be careful with that. And then, so he proceeds then to describe the boy's life immediate to this one, which was during the court of Louis XIII, in the later days of Louis XIII and the early days of Louis XIV. It was a guy named Neil, and he got caught up in very political uprisings. And that here is Jupiter opposite Pluto. That is a tendency to get in trouble with figures who are in authority. Jupiter is of course, always the king. It's the kingly archetype par excellence. And Pluto is power motivations. So the thing about past lives is that each life that we incarnate in is the sum total of our previous past lives. Although, as we said in the previous reincarnation video, not all of our karma, not all of the karma the Sinchit karma, the complete total karma of the sum total of all our lives, bears fruit in one lifetime, because it would be crazy, it would be too much. But nonetheless, past life characteristics do carry over. And so this individual probably, during this period of Louis XIV, was getting into trouble here. That's Jupiter opposite Pluto. And he was master of the robes and arbiter of fashion. So he was a dandy. And that is probably Venus conjunct Neptune here, the dandy archetype, finding spiritual beauty. And plus it is directly opposed by Uranus, which indicates a principle of individuality. He was probably distinguishing himself. He was a kind of couturier. And this couturier motif goes on all the way down into his present life as David Greenwood, as we'll see momentarily. So kind of a dandy, and that's Venus and Neptune there. And so then, so the next lifetime then is a lifetime in Greece, in ancient Greece, on the Isthmus of Thessaloniki, at a town called Salonika, where he lived as a tradesman. Now, this is the other thing. He has going back and forth. Well, there are three different aspects. The one is that Cayce tells him, what you want to do is go into business. Business is your leaning, but you also want to go into clothing. So maybe you can combine the two, go into clothing and business. So he was a couturier during his life under Louis XIV, but in this lifetime on Greece, he was a tradesman. So he was a businessman. And business, unfortunately, we don't have his houses, so we would need to watch the second house and the seventh house and the placement of Mercury and the Moon in those houses to catch this business orientation of his. So he was a tradesman. And then in the next lifetime, before that, it was during Alexander's conquests over Persia. So once again, he's caught in court politics. This boy has a tendency to be caught up in court politics. But during that lifetime now, he was a physician. And so let's look at his Chiron over here. It's just sort of sitting here all by itself, 13 degrees in an occult sign, Pisces. But now the surgeon archetype, as we have seen last time when I was talking about my lives, is Mars and Saturn. Mars is the body. Saturn tends to have the scalpel. And notice that it is almost exactly squaring Chiron. Chiron is 13 degrees. Saturn is 17 degrees and 18 degrees Mars. Exactly. This is his surgeon, his past life experience as a medical man during this period under Alexander the Great, during his conquests of Persia. But then he was thinking about, in the present lifetime as David Greenwood, wanting to become a surgeon again, wanting to study surgery, but his parents said, no, you should go into business. But we want you to go into business. We want you to make money. That's what you should do. So there's kind of frustration here in the current lifetime where he doesn't want to go into business. He wants to be a surgeon, but he does what his parents tell him to do. And then so Cayce mentions one other lifetime in Egypt, where his name then was Esauus, and he was a kind of lay preacher. It looks like it took place under the Hyksos invasions. Cayce is talking about Egypt being conquered by a foreign people, possibly Semitic Indo-Aryan, which would fit the Hyksos invasions of about 1500 BC. And the priests liked him because he was a lay preacher, and they could use him as a kind of middleman to appeal to the crowd. And so this individual finds himself at court a lot, and he had a very strong understanding of people's motivations, which again is Jupiter opposite Pluto. Pluto is the sort of crowd motivations. Crowds are motivated by Plutonian energies. And then so that's what the stenographer wrote down. and passed that information to the sister Alice Greenwood, who passed it to the parents, who said, "This is bullshit. Get this away from us." Alice had the good sense, though, to hang on to the reading. And 7 years later, when David found himself in his early 20s working at a newspaper office, not a business career at all, he read it and he said, "Well, first of all, I don't believe in reincarnation. Secondly, I've never had any digestive troubles. And thirdly, this isn't a business career. I'm stuck running this office, this newspaper office." Well, as it turns out, 6 years later, his sister hooked him up with an individual who was looking for a partner in a third-generation clothing factory, manufacturing uniforms. And so this was in 1940. And then so David took the job. Now he finds himself as a kind of a couturier, manufacturing military uniforms. And in 1943, then he was classified 4F by the Army because of digestive problems. So there goes the digestive problems. You have food allergies, digestive problems. Now he's starting to realize maybe that Cayce guy was onto something, because Cayce had told him the digestive problems came from the fact that you kept overeating during the court. When you were in the court of Louis the 14th, you were just eating everything in sight. And so that is a kind of what I term a karmic bleed through. And we get a lot of those karmic bleed throughs from previous lives. A lot of our phobias are bleed through from previous lives. All kinds of things. Personality. In India, they're called samskaras. They're ruts that are ingrained in the subtle body that, if they're not addressed, they'll just keep troubling you. In my case, for instance, I was alcoholic in my last lifetime as a surgeon, and I drank myself to death. So I didn't break the cycle. So it repeated again this time. So I wound up being alcoholic again this time. If I don't beat it this time, chances are it'll repeat again next time, and keep doing so. My mother, interestingly enough, was also alcoholic, but she beat it. In her late 40s, she quit permanently and became a substance abuse counselor. And not too long ago, I talked to her, I don't know, for the fourth or fifth time using a medium, and I asked her what she would do in her next life, and she said, "Well, now I'm going to become a person who heals with light." Whatever that means, I don't know. But clearly, in her case, breaking the alcoholic cycle means she's not going to have to repeat it. So that's the way these kind of karmic, these samskaras work. So David, meanwhile, so he's out of the army, and then he is promoted to, or at least he's still connected with it. He's promoted to an OCS clothing shop, and then when the war ends, he goes back into business to his original third-generation clothing factory, and goes back into business there. And then he became a close associate of Edgar Cayce. And that may actually be another aspect to his Uranus opposite Neptune, because that would normally code for spiritual innovation. And Edgar Cayce was definitely that, a spiritual innovator. And so maybe working with Cayce sort of fulfills that role. So that's yet another example of how astrology can be used to read past lives. I wish we'd had all the birth charts from those previous 4 lives that Cayce read for him. That would be great to look at the patterns. But as I've said before, it's very difficult to get a hold of concrete birth charts from previous lives. But this is the best that we could do.